Welcome to the latest episode of MQ's Open Mind podcast. And Craig and I are absolutely delighted that our guest today is Lily Bailey. And Lily is a fantastic author and former journalist. And Lily's really going to talk about maybe her own experiences and the great work that she's been writing about. Sort of focuses on OCD, or Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. So welcome, Lily, and thanks a million for taking the time to chat with Craig and I today.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Great. So we're just going to have, obviously, just a pretty informal conversation, just chat about your experiences and effectively your life. So maybe could you, to start off, tell us a bit about your experiences, which I know have directly informed your, two books now. We can talk about those in a second. But do you want to just kick us off with that, Lily? That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so I have OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and I've had it ever since I can remember, really, but I didn't know what it was for a long time. I think I got my diagnosis when I was 16, and so I spent a lot of my childhood and teenage years living with this thing and sort of thinking, gosh, does everyone think like this? And if so, how are they getting stuff done? Or is there something really wrong with me? But probably I should keep quiet about it, because my OCD tended to center around harm. I would have obsessions that I might harm someone, or that I might have done something wrong. And then my compulsions in response would tend to sort of be to kind of try and neutralize those fears by maybe like repeating a phrase in my head, or sort of analyzing the actions, ruminating. People often don't know that mental rumination can be a compulsion. And I definitely didn't know that. So I'd spend a lot of time analyzing my actions and trying to work out if I really was a monster. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts, sort of like, oh, I want to kill my dog, or I want to kill my family, which I really didn't want to do. They're ego dystonic, so they went against my values. But I didn't know that. I thought if I told anyone about that, maybe I'd just get taken to prison or locked away. And yeah, so it was really frightening, actually.
And so you're saying that but when do you first remember experiencing those thoughts? You mentioned 16 there.
Well, 16 was, when it sort of came to a head. I basically got so unwell with it that I decided that if I lay in bed and just kept completely still, then I wouldn't do things wrong. And that would be the best way to cope. And that was the point where people around me realized something was wrong. But yeah, I remember having it from a very young age. I guess like an example of that might be when I was in reception, a teacher put a note in our backpack, and I became convinced that this letter was a letter to my parents saying all the things I'd done wrong. So I went out of my way to destroy this letter and bin it. It was actually a letter telling us that there was going to be a fancy dress day. So then I was the only kid who came in not in fancy dress. That's like quite a strong memory I have, and it's probably also reinforced by the fact that other people in my family remember it. Mm-hmm. But just a real sense that I was going to be in trouble, that I'd done something terrible and I needed to atone for it, or make it right, or ask the person if I'd hurt them, or hide the evidence depending on how I was feeling on that day. So and also I would apologize as a compulsion too. So that would be happening from a very young age. I'd be sort of brushing against someone and being like, oh, I'm sorry, did I hurt you? Because in my mind, I'd sort of picture their bones all crunched up inside, that I'd really injured them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because I remember I read, I think it's something a few years ago in an interview you did in The Guardian, and I think you talked about if you brushed beside or against somebody, then that would be a letter. That'd be B, or if they had somebody banged into somebody's arm. So could you tell us a bit about that? So that you would then repeat these letters? Is that what it was, or? So
initially, in my sort of younger memories, it's this sort of vague fear that I've done something wrong, I've got to fix it. As I got older, I sort of developed more complicated compulsions, and one of them was when I was around the age of sort of 12, 13. I realized that I could, at the time, it's interesting because at the time I was like, oh, I've solved it. Because again, I didn't know I had OCD. I was like, this is a good way to deal with it. But actually it was just a further compulsion. So what I would do is, so say I thought I maybe stared at someone's bum, I'd take the letter B, put it on my list. And then maybe say I thought I I hurt their arm because I brushed, I brushed against them. I might take the letter A for arm, and then say I worried I came too close to someone and I smelt bad. I could take the letter S for smell, and then I'd be like BAS, BAS, BAS. And this would go on throughout the day. So in the end, I could have like hundreds of letters on my list, and I'd sort of review them all at nighttime and determine which one was like red. If it was red, then I had to carry it forward and continue thinking about it. If it was green, I could dismiss it, let it go. And then there'd sort of be like a reshuffling, and the whole process would begin again the next day.
And then in your processing throughout the day, then you were working out whether this would still be you could dismiss it as a green, or if it would still needed work, or what way was that? What was going through your head in terms of the green and red?
Green is this action was not so bad, I can move on from it. Red is this action was pretty bad and it needs to be ruminated about a bit more. During the day, though, I'd mostly sort of be stockpiling and doing some sort of loose rumination of actions. And then in the evening and nighttime, that was when, like, I don't know, I basically sent myself to my own court or something. I laugh, but it was pretty awful.
It must be exhausting. Utterly exhausting.
I can imagine. Yeah, very difficult, especially for a child to go through.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. It's really lonely when you don't know why this is happening to you, or what it is, or what's going on.
Yeah. And at that age, then, so you didn't share this with anybody at that stage?
I think I did. I would sometimes ask my mum for some kind of reassurance, and I was quite secretive, and because a lot of it, because it was happening so much in my head, I think people just thought that I was a bit of a daydreamer, that kind of thing. But I did ask my mum, like I would try to sort of confess to her some of the intrusive thoughts I had. And I think it came from a good place. She was just trying to reassure me. She'd say sort of like, oh, everyone has those thoughts. And I can see why she responded in that way. But if I did try, I think because it was so much worse in my head than it was externally, if I tried to sort of explain, it would sort of be dismissed as, oh, everyone thinks that sometimes, that kind of thing.
And then, because of course, as a parent, what you're trying to do is do whatever you can to reassure your loved ones. And do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sibling. She's 5 years younger than me.
Yeah, so you're unable then to talk to your sibling, your sister about it then. I mean, I'm just thinking when stuff happened to me in the past, I have an identical twin brother, so I always had him there to make sort of sense of the world with. But I suppose if your sibling is 5 years younger,
I didn't want to sort of bother her with it. And I do actually speak to her about it now. We're adults. It's quite a different relationship. And actually, interestingly, she went through various stages of having quite bad compulsions, and probably what would be clinically diagnosed as OCD, although she never got a diagnosis. And when she was going through that, I was able to sort of like pass on what I'd learned about OCD and therapy, and like how you can work with this thing to her. But yeah, we've both been through quite compulsive periods in our lives.
Was it difficult to get a diagnosis? Because I know you were saying that you first, like the symptoms were when you was quite young, but you got a diagnosis at 16. Was it quite difficult to actually get that diagnosis?
I mean, I think the difficulty was that, like, the period before the crisis point, because I wasn't really, I'm not blaming myself, but I wasn't really conveying what was going on. So it wasn't kind of clear that there was a problem. And I mean, I think OCD is really misunderstood and often not picked up. No one around me picked up on it. My teachers didn't. There would be certain things that would be picked up on. Like I would cry in lessons if I got a question wrong. And in the end, my parents ended up getting called into the school to like talk about whether there was something going on at home. But they didn't kind of focus on the fact that what was happening was that my compulsions were getting so bad I was crying. Like there was sort of inching towards it, but it didn't quite happen. From the moment that I stopped getting out of bed and was sent to a GP, actually my experience was really good, because my GP instantly recognized that what I was going through was, because I then explained it to her. She said, oh, that's OCD. And I was really surprised because I sort of had grown up with all of the stereotypes around OCD. And I was like, well, I'm really messy. But she explained to me how my thinking fit that obsessive compulsive pattern and how OCD can kind of be about anything. And from that period, from then on, actually my experience was really good.
Was that at 16 then, or what age did you go to speak to your GP?
That was when I was 16.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah.
And so then because obviously not getting out of bed might be one of the obviously symptoms of depression as well.
Yeah. Well, the thing that enabled her to say, no, this is what, because I mean, I don't know why I felt comfortable to speak to her on that particular day. I think it had just really reached an absolute crisis point. Maybe it helped that she was not someone I knew. And she's sort of more than saying like, why, like, she sort of said, well, what's going on? Why, like, in your head? And so I described the process, and that was, I think, how she sort of realized that it was OCD.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's brilliant that such a positive experience with your GP. And then, so I think, again, I've seen you've written about this elsewhere about then the support and treatment you did get. So cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a bit about that? And so again, was that easy to get access to that? And then how did you find that in terms of your support?
So I was referred for CBT with ERP, cognitive behavioral therapy with exposure response prevention, which is the gold standard therapy for people with OCD. And that experience was actually really good. I worked with a psychiatrist who was also a CBT trained therapist. And it was really helpful. And I mean, it took a long time. It was slow going. It also took a long time, even just to like convince me that I had OCD, because I was so sort of just, like I already said, those stereotypes around it. I just thought, well, no, I don't have OCD. I'm just a monster kind of thing. And then I was put on an SSRI at that time, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and that went on for a few years. I had a sort of another real crisis when I was 19. Then I had an inpatient stay, and then in one hospital I was in, I wasn't given CBT and was just sort of left to go about my business, which was a weird experience. It was, but then I was transferred to another hospital where I then was given really good CBT again. And then since then I have sort of been in and out of therapy. I like, if stuff flares up again, then I will try and go for another course of CBT. I mean, I guess the thing is, it's hard because with the NHS, you have these huge long waiting lists, and you have to sort of jump through a load of hoops, and they determine whether you're severe enough to qualify for help. And sometimes it really depends on who you see and that kind of thing. And I've had experiences since being out of hospital where it's like, I'll be on a waiting list for a really long time and then referred for like a 6-session course of CBT that's just basically almost like beginner CBT. It's just, stuff you do, and it's really unhelpful, and then that's really demoralizing. And then I've ended up having to sort of pay for private therapy for a few sessions just to get myself back on track with money I don't really have. It can be challenging. Yeah,
absolutely. And did I read somewhere as well, you've had the CBT, the specialist CBT with exposure, and then I think you've also had sort of like psychodynamic type psychotherapy as well.
Yeah, that's again in more recent years. I think I wouldn't have been able to do that before, like when I was in a crisis, or I don't think it would have been very helpful. But when I am a lot better, it's been really interesting to work in that kind of way, and like look at not even just OCD, but also just look at past trauma. And it's more introspective and less sort of based on like solving the immediate problem in front of me. I don't think I could work psychodynamically when I'm like in an OCD crisis.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting. I just think it's fascinating just looking at just helping people make sense of the different psychological therapies out there, and the different structures on them. And as you say, the psychodynamic, much more trauma focused, maybe more historical, looking at how the past is influencing how we feel and behave now, and obviously the much more structured approach to, say, CBT. And I think it's really interesting observation. That when you're in an acute OCD crisis, well, maybe you need a certain response, not another response. I think that's really, really interesting. And just really highlights, I think, that when we talk about the evidence-based and treatments and so on, it's the fit between the treatment and the individual, but not just the individual and the treatment, the context as well. And I recognizing that, I think that's really, really important. So then just thinking then about now then, and we'll talk about your books in a second and how you got to that space to start writing the books. And obviously Craig has one of your books there, I think your most
just
recent
go
book.
off shop. Yeah, here it is.
We can see it there, When I See Blue, which came out on June 9th, 2022, which I was joking with Lily earlier, which is the best day for any publication because it's my birthday.
Hey.
No, but so then thinking now though, Lily, and you've talked about obviously we've gone from childhood through the 16, then 19, and then obviously more recently. So how do you manage your mental health now and like in terms of when you are feeling overwhelmed or there's a crisis potentially escalating? I
have a really good support network that includes family and friends, but I also I run a sort of support group hour on Twitter called OCD Talk Hour, and it's funny because people will often thank me for running it, which is lovely, but I'm always sort of very much on the page of, it's like a peer-led group. It's really helpful for me too. I get a lot from it. There's just, I think there's so much you can learn from people with lived experience. Like if I'm going through something and I share it there, I'm always, overwhelmed by the response, and people will suggest ways of looking at things and doing things that I hadn't thought of. So it's having a really good community of people around me. I also attended an in-person support group for a few years when I was about 19, 20, and I retained some friends from there, and we all have a WhatsApp group, and they're just instrumental in my life, really. I think when you go through something and other people understand that unique experience, it's just really powerful. So if I'm really struggling, or if they're really struggling, we can pop it in the group chat and hear from each other. Activities I just find quite grounding and comforting when I'm struggling, or reading and walking and swimming, that kind of stuff. I really struggle with stuff like, I really struggle with sort of formal mindfulness, meditation-based activities, although I know they can be helpful for some people. But for instance, swimming, I think, is like my equivalent. It's as still as I can be. So yeah, that kind of thing. And then, like I said before, if I'm in real crisis, then I tend to realize I have to somehow figure out to have a few sessions of therapy.
So see the Twitter thing. So tell us when the Twitter hour is and what's the handle again? Just remind us.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday at 7 p.m. And you can if you find me on Twitter, I'm at Lily Bailey UK, and the hashtag is OCD Talk Hour. So if you come on at that time and either look at my handle or the hashtag, you'll see all of the tweets popping up. You can post saying how you're doing, or ask a question, or suggest a topic, or interact with others, that kind of thing.
Great. No, I think that's fantastic.
That's brilliant.
Craig.
Oh, no, I was going to say that's brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant to have a support group, especially of people of like-minded, can bounce ideas off each other and maybe find mechanisms to help your, when you're struggling.
Yeah. And I think the thing I like about Talk Hour is that, people communicate differently. And for some people, going to an in-person group is absolutely essential and what they need. But some people communicate better through writing and from a distance. And so I think I might be one of those people. And so it's quite nice for people who communicate in that kind of way.
Yeah, great. No, so Lily, before we move on to the writing of your books, so you touched on in some of the earlier chat there about some of the misunderstandings around OCD. So maybe I think it's really helpful maybe to talk about those. So what do you think the main misunderstandings that the average person in the street has about OCD?
I think mainly that it's all about symmetry and tidiness, cleanliness, liking things just so. I think what people misunderstand, and what I misunderstood when I didn't know what I was living with, is that OCD can be about anything. And you just really have to sort of come back to the name of this disorder. There's the obsessive component, the sort of the fear, the worry, whatever it is that comes into your mind that's causing a huge spike in anxiety or guilt or discomfort. And then there's the compulsive element, which is the action you take in response to that. And it can be physical or mental. I think a lot of people don't realize that compulsions are not always overt. They're not always someone tapping a thing a certain number of times, which I've done those compulsions too. They are very much compulsions, but they're not the only compulsions. So I think really the biggest sort of misunderstanding is people thinking that compulsions and obsessions are specific to cleanliness, contamination, perfectionism, and not realizing just how broad this thing can be. I mean, I've been talking to people with OCD for almost 10 years now, and I'm still regularly surprised to hear about the varied and incredibly complex ways in which people's obsessions and compulsions can manifest.
Yeah. No, I think the other one just came to my mind when you're speaking there is it's that when we often see it badly portrayed on the media, and it doesn't seem to really demonstrate the impact it can have in people's everyday lives, and that really debilitating impact. So when we try and minimize OCD, I mean, it's just terrible to see the minimization of it, because I think that, I mean, if you look at the research out there, we know it does badly disrupt people's daily life, and obviously the impact on your relationships, sense of your own sense of self often, and it can be a very lonely experience. I think the way you sort of described it, especially when you're younger, that and the shame you often and fear, I imagine, when you're talking to you're this awful person, and that sense of anxiety as well about maybe also being out of control. It's so difficult to control these things. And I do think that's, even though I think we've made some progress in the better portrayals of OCD in sort of the broader media, I still think it still is so too often is it minimized.
Yeah, and I think also, even if you do have the more commonly sort of known obsessions and compulsions, say it is around cleanliness and contamination, I think there is just still that misunderstanding of the level of distress this stuff causes. It's not like, oh, if you have obsessions and compulsions around contamination and tidiness, that you like doing that stuff, and that you're so OCD, you love tidying. Like, the clue is in the name, it's a disorder. So even if you do have the more sort of commonly known obsessions and compulsions, it's not that it's not a personality trait. It's not that you like or enjoy doing this stuff. It's really whatever form it takes, it's really incredibly distressing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it frustrating when people say like just a little OCD and stuff like that, just throw it around like it's quite a trivial subject?
Yeah, I think it is. Yes, it is frustrating, and I do get frustrated by it. And I think, and then people sometimes will say, well, what's the big deal? And I guess the big deal is that it's that kind of throwing around of the term that makes people like me, when I was younger, not know what they had. At my school, I'm sure I probably would use that term too and say, oh, so-and-so is a bit OCD, for meaning someone's a vague perfectionist, whilst not realizing that this is the thing that's ruining my life. And then also, I know so many people who they sort of finally end up almost getting a diagnosis, and they sort of say, oh no, that's not me, and then they can waste more years of their life. So it's misinformation. It's more than just, it's frustrating because it's like, this person just doesn't understand my experience at all, but it's also really dangerous.
Well, I think the issue, I totally agree. And I think that, because what you need is, it's the same with any mental health problems or any mental health challenges, you need validation. You need your feelings validated, your thoughts validated, because the experience is real for you, and you say distressing and potentially debilitating, and can permeate all aspects of your life. If somebody then is sitting just dismissing it, I mean, then there's a vicious cycle of feeding your own then anxieties, and, well, am I really experiencing this? Why am I experiencing this? I mean, it is an awful cycle to be in. So moving on then, Lily, if we can, to your writing. And so maybe before we talk about the book specifically, so did you make a decision at some stage, I'm going to start talking about my experiences in a more public fora, or tell us a bit about that journey?
So I was working as a journalist, and I didn't speak publicly about my OCD, but I became increasingly aggravated by the amount of just misinformation and stuff I would see. So I think in one particularly annoyed moment, I started a blog, and then that blog, I blogged for a while and sort of started connecting with other people who had OCD. And then that blog got picked up by a nonfiction publisher who asked me if I wanted to publish a book about living with OCD. So that was kind of how it happened.
Oh, fantastic. And then, so how was that? So tell us about the experience of writing, because obviously it's a really, really personal Well, that's obviously, so let's think the chronology here. So that the book came out first in 2016, am I right?
Yes, that was my first book, Because We Are Bad, which is a memoir of my own experiences with OCD. So that was the first book I wrote. And then When I See Blue, which is the one that's just come out, was written kind of in response to Because We Are Bad, because people would say to me, "Oh, I love this book, it was helpful. When are you going to write something that is suitable for my teenager or the young person in my life, or this child I know who has OCD," that kind of thing. So that was how that one happened.
So then I'm just trying to get how long it took you then to write the book, because that's a big deal.
The book actually did. Yeah, I don't think it did. It took about a year to write. The book came out when I was 21. The first book came out when I was 21.
Okay.
That helps. I will say, I know lots of people talk about this, but I do find, I think it is just living with mental illness. And also I know people describe this with OCD, but my memory is sort of a bit shot to pieces. So yeah, I apologize.
No, not at all. No, I apologize for asking the questions.
It's a very reasonable question.
No, because I think it's just really great that obviously blogs are great in and of themselves, of course, but then you just provide this platform for then getting a publishing deal for a book, which I think is just incredible. And the reviews for Because We Are Bad are been fantastic, or were fantastic, still are fantastic. So that means how did you feel? Because I just know when I wrote a book recently, my concern was when it came out, the days before publication day, you're like panic. Well, I certainly was panicking. So, but yours is so personal, as it's a memoir. So how did you feel about that, and how did you find actually the writing process? Was that different from blogging, or? I
think I almost didn't think about the fact that it was going to be read by anyone else. It is such a personal book. I'm not sure, and I'm almost 29 now. I'm not sure I could. I don't know. There's something about just being 20 and just being like, okay. I honestly, I'm not sure if I would do that now. It's so vulnerable and exposing, and it's not that I regret it, but it was really intense when people started to read it. And it's written from a very young place. It's immature in a way, and it's sort of a bit like, who does this 20-year-old think she is, writing a memoir about her life, kind of thing. But so honestly, I don't know if it would happen now. When the idea came and people were asking for this book for young people, it was put to me, well, why don't you just do Because We Are Bad, but do it sort of in an age appropriate way? I was like, I can't do it. I am right. Obviously, When I See Blue is about OCD, but it's a different character. He has a different life to me. He's also a boy. I made differences between him and me. I really needed to put some space between it. And people will often say, like, was writing Because We Are Bad cathartic? And I think I expected it to be, but honestly, it was actually just quite hard. And I think the thing that sort of kept me going was just being like, I'm really peeved by people misunderstanding OCD, and I really need to do something about it. I do find writing and journaling can be therapeutic, but there is a difference between the stuff that is very much for me and the stuff which is a more kind of almost therapeutic, therapeutic process. I would say rather than writing something that is going to go. Although I know I just said that I had to kind of think about it like it wasn't going to be read by people. It's a weird experience.
No, it is. No, and I don't think the way you described it, I think, is because it's not just one set of emotions, because you have a whole range of emotions going on about probably obviously excited about getting your story out there, but also then the anxiety. So there's mixed emotions indeed. Just because I'm just thinking the timings again then, Lily. And I don't normally get so fixated in timelines, so I apologize. I don't know where this has come from today. But maybe it's because your other book's published my birthday or something. I don't know. But so that when you're writing it, that's when you wasn't in and around the time when you were an inpatient as well. So it was around 19 after that. So you really had gone through a lot by the time you wrote the book. So when you're saying, "Oh, I was so young, what did I know?" But my God, you'd gone through a lot at that stage.
It was in quite quick succession because I was doing a university degree, which I dropped out of. That was when I was about 19. I had an inpatient stay, and then got this job sort of, I worked in a nursery as a teaching assistant for a few months. And then I basically wrote to my local magazine and was like, will you take me on to make tea and coffee? Sort of convinced them to keep me on and give me a job. And that was when I started the blogging, and that was when the publisher contacted me. So it all happened. Yeah, it did all happen. It all happened really quickly. And I was quite sort of freshly out of crisis when I started writing the book.
Yeah, an incredibly brave thing. People say brave a lot, but I mean, it really is an incredibly brave thing, and obviously will have helped thousands of people. And I bet over the years you've had lots of correspondence from people saying, "Oh, I can see me in that story or in your story," and I think that's just so rewarding. Never mind getting the challenging the stigma and the misunderstandings, but helping people identify that actually I'm not alone, and other people experience these things.
Yeah, I will say that that's kind of almost like the cathartic bit. Like when I was writing it, it was very much like, okay, this is the job, this is the mission statement. I want people to understand I'm going to write this a chapter at a time, and then it's going to be done. And it was quite like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
But once it's out in the world, it's actually hearing from people and connecting with them. That is really genuinely very cathartic, actually.
Yeah. Oh man, I mean, such a gift to the world in that sense, and that sounds a bit grand, but I think it's true. I think it's true. But it is a gift, because once it leaves your computer, you have no control over it, and it's then, and I think that is a gift because you're helping others. So I mean that genuinely. So then fast forwarding then on to well, modern day, so to speak. That's this year. Craig, do you want to hand over to you, because then you've really excitingly published When I See Blue. So Craig, do you want to tell us what because you've been dipping into it.
I am so excited to talk about this. I've learned so much. Although this is aimed at children, I've learned so much from this book. It's really fascinating to know the depths of OCD. Whereas I guess a lot of the misconceptions where it's just, oh, have everything in line and stuff. And I guess in the book, Benny actually talks about the misconceptions some people actually have with OCD, and just know how far it goes in terms of like colors and steps and stuff like that. It's a wonderful book, really is. I feel like I'm doing a review now.
Thank you so much, Craig. That means a lot.
Lily, could you maybe give us an overview of When I See Blue? What the synopsis?
Yeah, sure. So the main character is a boy called Ben. He moves from Essex to London. His family are making that move, and he, at his old school in Essex, he's been a bit of an outsider, treated as a bit of a weirdo, and that's largely because of the compulsions that he does at school, and the fact that people just think it's a bit strange and they sort of ostracize him. Anyway, he decides that when he comes to London, he's going to reinvent himself, and he's not going to do any compulsions, or if he does do them, he'll do them in his head, which is something I went through a bit, that sort of conversion of being like, right, people think this behavior is weird, I'm now going to mentalize it, which is not something that everyone with OCD goes through, but it can happen. So he comes to London, and he's right, I'm going to start over, boom. But obviously it's not easy to just reinvent yourself, and especially if you're living with a complicated mental illness, just decide not to have it. That's not really going to work. So he ends up meeting a friend called April, and he's never really had a friend before. And with her help, they sort of start to figure things out. And he has the help from other people around him too. He meets a therapist later in the book called Dinesh, who he works with, and it's sort of about his struggle to sort of find his place in the world and deal with what's going on. And it is about OCD and his experience, but it's also about friendship and just about being 12 years old, really.
Yeah, there's some really difficult like subject matter in this book, especially talking, don't want to spoil anything, but talking about Benny's parents, is in particular his mum.
Yeah.
And I guess with I don't know if I
no, you can say.
Yeah. With alcoholism and stuff like that, and dealing with that as a young boy in year 8, just with the OCD as well. I think one thing definitely is to have a friend like April. April in the book is a bit of a rebel that definitely pushes Ben out of his comfort zone, and is that stepping stone for him to learn more about his, I guess, condition.
Yeah, I think April is exactly what Ben needs.
Yeah. Did you, based on some of your own experiences? I know
Yeah.
you said you wanted to separate it from yourself.
No, but it is. I think I wanted to create a level of separation, but at the same time, it is about a child who has OCD, and that is based on my own experience. And a lot of Ben's compulsions are stuff that I did or had. And yeah, so his storyline is different to mine, and we're not quite. In fact, in some ways, we're quite different. But yes, the OCD element is based on my experience.
And then, how did you find writing fiction? I know it's obviously some components obviously taken from your own life, but writing fiction book rather compared to writing the memoir. How was that experience?
I think it was a really good experience, actually. I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer. And when I was younger, I always imagined myself writing fiction. And the publisher I'm with have actually taken a sequel. So I'll be writing another book for 9 to 12-year-olds, and that's fiction. And yeah, I feel like I'm where I need to be.
Fantastic. And when's your deadline for the next book?
I don't really know. I mean, I think I'm actually not in an OCD way. It's more that because I used to be quite chaotic, but I've sort of worked to become a bit more organized with deadlines. So I think they probably know that I'm on it, but like it is supposed to come out a year, I think, after this book. So yeah. Soon.
That's a good deadline. I like a soon deadline. That's always good. So no, and I wish you all the best with writing with the sequel. Then it's really, really exciting, Lily, and again a whole new audience of obviously young people, but obviously not so young people in the case of Craig. Yeah. I suppose in terms of Harry Potter was written for kids and obviously has good universal appeal. So it seems that When I See Blue will have that universality as well. Can I maybe, as this obviously is an MQ Open Mind research podcast as well, we're trying to mix the sort of research and the lived experience of people's experiences. So Lily, maybe ask you if you're thinking about, because you have obviously, I assume, been thinking about the evidence for what works and doesn't work in terms of helping people with OCD. But if somebody said to you, here is £1 million, right? And you could invest it in research to help people with OCD, or to understand what would you have any sense? What would your number one question be? What we would try and do with that money?
Well, I think, as we've kind of spoken about, there's quite a solid research base that indicates that CBT with ERP is a really effective treatment option for people with OCD, and also that taking an SSRI in combination can be helpful. But I think it's also important to talk about the fact that there remains a significant proportion of people with OCD who are treatment resistant to that stuff, and for whom it doesn't seem to help either as much or sometimes at all. I think for CBT with ERP, the number of the sort of, obviously it depends on what research you look at, but in general it seems that sort of about 60% of patients have clinically significant improvement, but that's also quite a lot of people who don't. Lots of people drop out of treatment prematurely. There remains a group of people who will tell you, I've taken every SSRI under the sun. I've tried CBT lots of times, nothing works. So I think if I had £1 million, what I would be doing that is looking into broadening research into treatment options. I mean, stuff like acceptance and commitment therapy and EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Lots of people anecdotally report that they're having success with that. And if you look at the research, it sort of says like these treatments have been found to be, quote, possibly efficacious. And it would just be really not, I mean, without sounding too fluffy, I would just really love for there to be treatment options for everyone with OCD. Because, and so, I mean, for instance, something that I'm really interested in is the increasing research into psilocybin. I think that's how you say it. I know people say it differently. Orchard OCD have been, which is an organisation here in the UK, have been crowdfunding for a study that they've just started. I think there's a small Yale trial that's currently recruiting, and there was a small trial back in 2006. But so psilocybin is a natural compound found in magic mushrooms, and so people are looking into like whether that in sort of small doses could be a treatment option. And I just think that's really interesting. I'd probably put not necessarily just into that, but I just, that kind of area.
Yeah, no, but I think, but you described it as fluffy, this whatever. But I think it should be the aspiration that we develop novel treatments. Doesn't matter if they're pharmacological, psychosocial, whatever they may be, psychological more generally, but that will work for everybody, because the stark reality is, in the exact same way with any other treatments, and there's no treatment is effective for everybody. And
exactly.
But it's trying to find that fit. And that's why we need this innovation. We need to think of new ways, and like acceptance and commitment therapy obviously is one of the newer generations of psychological treatments. And it's trying to look to see, well, what works, and recognizing that we are all individuals. So of course, if we're individuals, it needs an individual or a personalized response, but we need the evidence base. So I think I totally agree. Let's look at whatever, try out anything and everything to see what works and what's effective. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Well, it's also just really important, because without that research, then like the NHS will not fund access to those therapies, or this insurance if you're in the States, or where, depending on what your healthcare system is. So if there are therapies that can help, and that research is needed in order to help people get access to them, I think it's really important that we investigate that. And no, it's not fluffy. It's a bit Miss World, isn't it? So say, I want to help everyone, but that's why I would put my money there, because I think it's really important, and I think it's very limiting when someone is not responding to their CBT with ERP, and it's like, well, that's the gold standard, that's the treatment option that we have for you. Nothing else is available currently, unless you go private and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great suggestion. So we're sort of bringing things to a sort of a close. So I have there's a couple of final questions I have. Just they're different from the sort of mental health OCD type questions. But one just which we had thought about asking you, which I think is really important, is, well, what advice? Like, you have lots of experience of OCD and with now writing about OCD. What advice would you give somebody with OCD?
I think one of the first things you can do that is really helpful is educating yourself about OCD. Partly because, like we've talked about, there are so many misconceptions around it, and just having that psychoeducation, even if it's something you've done through looking at charity sites online, or a self-help book by a doctor or a psychiatrist, or it can be really empowering, and be like, okay, so that's why that's happening, and that's how that works. And it can also be helpful, I think, if you are again, like we've talked about, on a big long waiting list, to sort of in the meantime start trying to work out what it is that you've been living with. I would encourage people to try and access some CBT with ERP, and to get a diagnosis, and to push for second opinions if you do encounter a GP or someone in the mental health sphere who is less educated about, because that does it happens a lot less, but it does still happen. And to connect with other people who have OCD, because there's a lot to learn from people with lived experience.
Absolutely. And obviously every Wednesday at 7 p.m.
Yes.
Go for the Twitter hour. And I think it's great advice, Lily. So, but before I do the last two questions, we've just spotted. I can't not ask this question. So, I've read somewhere that you're a tandem bicyclist.
Yes.
But I mean, I tried that once as a in my early 20s, and it didn't go well. So tell me about that then.
Well, I have been into, full disclosure, I actually haven't ridden a tandem bicycle for quite a while now, but I was doing it for a period of time. I ride a bike and enjoy that. And there's a group of blind and visually impaired cyclists that I sort of came into contact with through my now husband, who were looking for a cyclist, a sighted cyclist
Okay.
to be a pilot rider on one of their tandem bicycles. And I said, I was asked if I'd had any interest in doing this. And I was like, I do have interest, but I'm very dyspraxic. I'm not sure I'm your woman. But I went along to the group, and they trained me up, and yeah, so I can pilot ride a tandem bicycle now.
Impressive. That's an impressive skill to have.
It's a lot of trust for your for the rider you're with to
absolutely
in you, and I'm not sure I would put that trust in you. But anyway, Craig, no crashes so far.
Craig, are you a tandem cyclist?
I love mountain biking, but the idea of having someone either in front or behind me, it just kind of freaks me out. I'm convinced that if I had somebody else, it'd be my fault that we fall off or something. Yeah.
It sort of reminds me of, this is a bit of a tangent, it reminds me of when I first moved to Scotland. So I'm Irish, Lily, but when I first moved to Scotland, everybody here does whatever mountain climbing of mountains, but there's lots of indoor climbing walls. And a mate of mine who, at that stage, he must have been 15 stone, right? And I was probably 10 stone then. And there's a thing called belaying, which is you obviously climbing, for those who don't know the climbing stuff. So you climb up, so one of you is climbing up the wall, but the rope, they're attached to you at the bottom on the rope, and you're meant to stand the person on the ground in case the person falls off, right? So that you stop them from falling right to the ground.
Now, I can see where this is going.
Think of the physics, right? So 10 stone on the ground, him and his 15 stone, and he falls off. And you're meant to, there's a way in which you can do it that you can, whatever, I don't know, that you're not meant to. So literally it was something out of a cartoon, which was, so basically he falls off, slips off, and he rockets to the ground. And then I literally rocket to the air, and it just didn't work at all. So it reminds me a bit of what you said about the tandem and the trust you need to have in each other. Anyway, that was just a bit of an aside, so apologies for that, everybody. But anyway, so my last two, just to bring it to a close, Lily, unless there's anything particular you would like to talk about we haven't touched on, Lily?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I always think it's a nice way to sort of bring the podcast to an end, which is, first of all, thinking back to your 16-year-old self. So what advice, again, so I've asked you about advice you give to other people who obviously suffer from OCD, but thinking more generally, what advice would you give to yourself, to your 16-year-old self now, reflecting as what you're saying, you're 29 now, did you say?
Yeah. I think I would tell her first of all, I would say, look, you have OCD, go and get a diagnosis. But I would also say, stop worrying so much about what people think of you. And obviously that's easier said than done, especially when there is the compulsive element. But I would just be like, just be weird, be you. It's fine. You'll meet people who like you for that. And it's a lot less exhausting than just trying to be something you're not all the time.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it just reminded me of, I think, one of the reviews I've read for When I See Blue was, When I See Blue is like the new Wonder. It should be, and the Wonder, I haven't read the book Wonder, but I've seen the film Wonder. That's the same idea of accepting who you are. And my God, that's great advice. And then the last question is, again, if you had this ideal sort of time travel capsule thing, so you could have dinner or coffee with just one person, living or dead, who would that be? Who would you really most likely to be? And that's a really unfair question asking one person, but let's try.
I'm a big Doctor Who fan, so I would like that time capsule to be the TARDIS.
Right. Oh, good.
There's a lot of references to Doctor Who in this. Yeah.
And I'd probably like to ride round in it a bit with Peter Capaldi, because I just think he's the best. He's my favorite Doctor. I love him. He's just so cool. I love everything he's in and works on, and I think we'd have a really good time.
and he's Scottish, and
right.
And I live in Scotland, but Irish. But anyway, no, that's great. No, Peter Capaldi is a fantastic actor, and I don't think he's ever done anything bad, actually. Well,
Writing never bombs.
Yeah, no, never bombs. That's a great way to end. Okay, so on behalf of Craig and I, Lily, thanks so much for your time. And then just for those who are listening, catch obviously Lily's books, and obviously Craig is holding one now when I say blue now, and obviously best of luck with the ongoing writing, and now with the sequel, and the really important work you're doing in promoting and dispelling myths around OCD. So thanks a million, Lily. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.